As everyone waits with bated breath here in the U.S. to hear the results of Robert Mueller's Russiagate investigation, we've got a special guest coming to us from Russia, an American expatriate. I've got Rick Macy. Rick, hello.
Hello, Jason. Hello from Russia. Hello from St. Petersburg.
Привет. Как дела?
Хорошо, спасибо. Все хорошо здесь. You speak some Russian.
Well,
cool.
I know how to say hello, how you doing, and that's about it.
That's a start. That's more than I knew when I came here.
And so what we've got today is a very interesting story that fits perfectly with what we're trying to do here at Crowdsource the Truth. You are someone, as I understand it, who's been watching the show on YouTube and reached out to me to share your story. Now, you and I have had one phone conversation and several emails back and forth, and it's a complex story that you've got. So it's extremely difficult for me to vet you, to vet your story, to vet anyone for that matter. And even with large news organizations like Fox or the New York Times or CNN, we've heard of situations where ex-CIA agents or whoever it might be have fooled those organizations. And in fact, this entire Russian collusion story has been carried for almost 2 years, when we may be on the verge of learning that there's nothing to it at all. So what we're going to do today, Rick, is you're going to present your story to me, to the Crowdsource the Truth audience, and people can look at your information, investigate what you say. The hope is that we can help you find answers, you can help us find answers, and if there's anything that you share that is incorrect or not accurate, perhaps the crowdsource process will help vet that out. So why don't you take it away and tell us exactly how you went from being an executive, an American executive, to being essentially an expatriate there in Russia.
Oh, gosh. All right. Well, my name's Rick Macy. I'm an American, 54 years old, and I've lived for 17 of the last 22 years in Russia. I'm a former CEO of the Yellow Pages of Russia, and prior to that, I'd served in the Navy for 6 years as an electronics technician back in the late 80s, and I worked at the company that actually made the Watergate bug receiver. So you talk about spies for a moment. So I touched on that world, and that world touched me a little bit, which is the heart of my story for you today, Jason. And
what was that company, Rick, that made the Watergate bug receiver?
Watkins Johnson Company. It's now owned by an Italian company called Leonardo, and it's a division called Leonardo DRS. But basically, they made surveillance receivers, direction finders, demodulators. Big Cold War supplier to the NSA for making radios that you would use to listen into the Russians, basically.
Huh.
So it was technology. It was a great job. I got to travel, become a sales guy, and my first areas of responsibility were Latin America and the Middle East, later the Far East, and then I changed companies, went to Harris Corporation, who make the cell intercept product, triggerfish, stingray, if you're familiar with that.
Yes, and you and I spoke about that a little bit.
Right, that's right.
That's an interesting line of products that Harris Corporation makes. So the triggerfish is essentially what would be known as a dirt box type of thing?
Sure. I like to call them spook receivers, but that's just, it was 20 years ago now.
And that allows the user of this device to intercept cellular phone communications and either record them or redirect them, right?
Or pretend to be a base station, find out the location of the user. I mean, these boxes are pretty intense.
Why is this legal to sell?
Because there's no law against it. I sold at Watkins Johnson. We had a competing product to triggerfish and stingray. The exportable version was called the WJ8665, and I sold one of those to the Venezuelan military intelligence, one to the Chilean military intelligence, and one to a distributor in Thailand who was going to use it as a demo. I learned later he was using it to listen to his competitors. So ethics Sometimes
Wow.
they're lacking. All State Department licensed exports. I'd go with my suit and my tie, get on the plane, and go to these different countries. There you go. There it is. There's Tim Gelwicks. He actually filled my spot after I went into sales as a trainer and tech writer. You can't see his face there. Nice. But yeah, that was the 8665. That was an analog intercept box. So before we had all this digital stuff, we've got the 3G, 4G, 5G, whatever. Back when there was just AMPS, the American standard that Motorola developed, NMT, the Nordic system, and TAX, what the British were using, this box could intercept all of those systems, decode the signaling, let you listen and record the audio. You could do all sorts of stuff. So what they can do now with a Harris Triggerfish or Stingray, I can only imagine. But basically, you're pretending to be a cell phone base station, and what a phone company could do, you could do with that box. Why they're legal? They're legal. So God bless.
Amazing.
Yay.
So you're basically selling spy tools.
Exactly. Yes, that's where I got my after my 6 years in the Navy. I did a year at General Electric waiting for a top secret security clearance, and an ad came up in the Washington Post for a technical trainer, and I had done that in the Navy, so I thought I'd apply instead of sitting around waiting for this clearance, and I joined Watkins Johnson, and it was really cool because, as a guy, if you ever go to Best Buy, you want to sit in the electronics section all day. That was like that every day I'd go to work. They hired me to go to Finland to train the Finnish Air Force in some of these surveillance receivers they had bought. So I got a chance to look at the Soviet Union about 4 months before it collapsed from Helsinki. That's kind of cool. And then I got to train some Israelis, some Singaporeans, Malaysians. I was a good trainer. I really took it seriously because I'd been trained in the Navy, and they teach you how to fix radars and radios down to the component level. So God bless the U.S. military. Best training I've ever gotten probably was in the military. So I took that mindset and applied it to this job, and I was doing very well with it, doing tech writing when we didn't have customers for training, and they had a spot open up in international sales, so I applied, and they took me. So suddenly the stuff that I had trained people on, I was able to go and, I had a $2.4 million sales plan my first year. I had no idea how to sell anything, and I thought, well, the one thing I do know is the customers, they're not in this factory in Gaithersburg, Maryland. They're in these other countries. I have to get on a plane. So unlike the other sales guys, I would always take equipment with me to show the customer. So I take direction finders, I take these receivers, and my first big contract was about $600,000 with the Kuwaiti Ministry of Internal Affairs. 3 special radios that could tell you where the signal's coming from so they could look across the Iraqi border, because this was after the first Iraq war, before the second, and these guys had, they'd had the crap beat out of them, so they were investing in radio technology, like every country has. We all have our NSAs. The Brits have GCHQ. Every country has their security services, and they all have the technology to go spy on everyone, as Ed Snowden has let us all know. And this video, I'm sure people are watching besides your subscribers right now, Jason.
Right.
If that makes any sense.
I have no doubt.
Yeah. So if this goes haywire, or you don't see me tomorrow, you'll know what happened.
So it's important that people get this background, because you're not, just some guy who's hanging out and got wrapped up in a whole load of intrigue that people would expect to see in a Hitchcock movie. You're an ex-military officer who's gotten a job.
Enlisted.
An ex-military enlisted man who you had security clearances, I presume, from your work with radar and stuff in the military. And now you're in a job with a company that is quite clearly a member of the military-industrial complex, as it would be known, I think, right?
Absolutely, yes.
So you're hobnobbing with international people who are maybe having an interest in infiltrating these companies, understanding the nature of the technology, getting to higher level people.
Absolutely, absolutely.
All right. So what's next in your story?
Let's do this. So I got a job at Harris Corporation after Watkins Johnson. Again, Watkins Johnson's the company that made the receiver that listened to the Watergate bug. So I get hired by Harris. Why did I change jobs? I was offered to become a European sales manager as opposed to being in the Far East. And I thought, because I had my first wife, it'd be nice to be home more often. Europe's closer, the Far East was a lot further away, and Europe is awesome. So they offered me the job to be sales manager for Greece, Turkey, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and Finland. And I just thought, that's great. All I have to do is make my sales plan, and I've got summers in Scandinavia and winters in Greece and Turkey. It sounds like a pretty good job. And it was a little bit more money than Watkins Johnson. So I moved myself and wife to Rochester, New York. And a couple months into it, my boss, who's now the president of that division of Harris, Dana Maynard, very smart guy, comes into my little cubicle because he was the director of European sales at the time. He'd hired me to replace him because he just got promoted. And he says, "You're the new guy. You get to get the former Soviet Union." And I thought, well, I don't want that. That's awful. The guys that I was in the Navy for 6 years when Reagan was president. I mean, I want to kill Russians. I don't want to sell to Russians. This is, and he says, no, look, another division of Harris that makes phone switches has sold 209 phone switches to a company called Gazprom, which we know now, I didn't then. And so you got to go, and if you can't sell anything, that's fine, but you write your trip reports and, you go do the work. So I said, okay. And I came to Russia and got the first contract out of Russia with one of the railways for an older military radio system that would send images. Today we have our cell phones. We can send images. We can do the Skype calling. Back in 1995, you couldn't do that, if you remember. We were younger then. We had more hair, and radios weren't what they are now.
Right. So
I got this contract, and on my second trip into Russia, a young girl came and knocked on my door, and this was the 90s in Russia. Yeltsin was president. It was a very different time. People weren't getting paid their salaries. The streets weren't lit up at night. It was a pretty scary place. You had mafia. This is before Putin came in. And I'd traveled a lot by that time, maybe 50 countries, and I'd never seen anything like Russia. It was just bizarre world, compared to Europe, compared to the Far East. No McDonald's, for example.
Right. So this is just on the cusp of perestroika.
Exactly. The perestroika's happened. People have suffered a lot. It's before they're coming out of it. Yeltsin's still president, and they're going through prime ministers before Putin became prime minister. So it was a pretty hectic time in Rusa.
It's kind of a mad dash for natural resources. The people who are now known as oligarchs are generally kind of like ex-government ministers who managed to work out deals. Bill Browder was very involved. Lee Stranahan has spoken about this, how these guys basically kind of cheated everybody out of these vouchers that were given out so that the people could own sort of stock in these previously nationalized companies. But the communists, the generations of communism had developed a population that didn't really have the kind of entrepreneurial spirit that we have here in the United States. And so this understanding of stock wasn't really there. People were trading these vouchers for, pennies on the dollar to the friends of Bill Browder that Putin now has called out. So you're there right as this is happening.
Exactly. And, it's an amazing time, a kind of a frightening time. And as I'm in Russia, I'm very lonely on a business trip. And I tried to be faithful to my wife and be a good guy. But on this trip, I failed. This girl came, knocked at my door, and we're now married the second time. She's part of this story. And she's the reason that I moved into Russia. Beautiful Russian woman. I'd never seen anything like it. I was overwhelmed. And I would make sure that every trip I took going to Europe, I'd go to Russia and see her, so I was cheating on my wife. And it was a huge thrill. I've got to confess this because it's the truth. And there she is. She's beautiful. She's from Nizhny Novgorod. She's been off to see her parents for 2 weeks. She gets back tomorrow. She's going to kill me after this conversation.
Oops.
That's all right. We all have to grow up sometime, myself included, and her too. In any case, so I fell for her, and I left my first wife, and I quit my job at Harris because in the Moscow Times, there was an ad for commercial directors for cell phone companies. And I thought, wow, because I was ready to leave my wife and just go move to Russia to be with this girl, Svetlana. I mean, look at her. She's really, really beautiful. You don't see her dimples, but she's gorgeous. And she was 21 and I was 30, so this is 20-something years ago now. But I was going to take a job for half the money just to, I just thought it's crazy. I can't bring her to America. She speaks no English. I speak no Russian.
Wow.
We're just having great sex. And it's just nuts. But, I'm traveling all the time, and I've fallen for this girl. It's the old story, isn't it? And so I was very fortunate, I thought, at the time. In retrospect, I wonder if the agency hadn't put this together for me to fall into, like laying out breadcrumbs.
Now, let me ask you this. The Moscow Times, it's a Russian paper or it's an English language paper?
Set up by a Dutch fellow named Dirk Sawyer. He's kind of short. He made a lot of money selling that and Cosmopolitan and a bunch of other magazines that he had the rights for to print the Russian versions of. Very energetic Dutch guy set that up. I don't know the current ownership of the Moscow Times. They used to have a St. Petersburg Times, but that closed down because there's just not enough English speakers in St. Pete to make it commercially viable anymore.
Is this a serious paper? One of the top stories is about a Russian smuggling a drugged orangutan out of Bali.
It's the most serious English language newspaper in Moscow.
Okay.
It doesn't have much competition in that segment. So it's read by very, very few people. I mean, Moscow's 10 to 15 million people. If their circulation's over 40,000, I'd be surprised.
So it's a small paper.
Yeah, absolutely. But for the expat community, it was important, especially in the 90s. The foreign companies would come in, they would actually advertise in that because they'd be selling to each other.
Right. And they basically know who's reading this. Americans and Europeans are reading this newspaper. So if you're trying to target someone like yourself, there's the, bait kind of thing.
Absolutely. And especially in the 90s, still today, many multinationals want their own people in the senior executive positions. So, you'll still see expats here, Brits, Americans. But in the 90s, for example, when I got the job offer to come to Russia and be the sales and marketing director for a cell phone startup, they offered, we'll pay your salary, which they offered $75,000. I was on $55,000 at Harris, so it was a $20,000 increase. Wow. We'll give you free housing. We'll give you a car to driver. And I just thought, wow, that's pretty damn good. And I get to set up a cell phone company, so I get to get out of this little segment of military communications into the larger thing of telecommunications. So I thought, that's a move probably. And this, again, back when systems were analog and not digital. So I met this guy named Jonathan Sparrow who interviewed me. He's now the head of Cisco for Russia. And unless I miss my guess, he has a reporting line to Langley, but we'll get to that in a little bit. Let me not jump too fast because it's got to make sense.
Sure.
In any case, I get offered to go move to Siberia to a town called Kemerovo, which is a little bit east of Novosibirsk. So imagine you're on the planet Earth and there's no way you could physically be further away from a major body of water. That's where I lived for 2 years, setting up this mobile phone company.
Wow.
And to your point, in the Soviet system, they didn't have a lot of there weren't sales and marketing guys, which is why when the investor in this cell phone startup, a company called Millicom International Cellular out of Luxembourg, they would put in 2 senior executives.
Millicom International.
Yeah, Millicom International Cellular, they've morphed into Tele2 through some combined shareholdings within Russia. So they're
And did they have anything to do with Nortel or Entrust?
Well, with Nortel, they'd buy some equipment from Nortel, but they would buy from Ericsson or from Lucent or from anyone.
Is this them? Millicom, the digital lifestyle?
No, that'd be different.
That's not them.
I can't tell. I'm looking at your screen. Millicom International Cellular. I think they're still active in Latin America, but I'm not sure. They sold off their European assets to the, what company was it? Well, it's Tele2 now. TELE2, the number.
Interesting.
So in any case, to your point, the Soviets didn't have sales managers, and they weren't doing Western accounting. So in the Soviet system, labor didn't count for anything. In the Western system, it does, as an example. We do GAAP accounting. I'm not an accountant. I know enough to be dangerous. And so Millicom seconded people like myself as an American executive. I've been a sales manager. So now I get the title commercial director, responsible for the sales, marketing, and customer service for a cell phone company that they invested $2 million in out in Siberia in the city of Kemerovo. So I get to move up to Kemerovo, speaking no Russian, and I'm like the only American in a city of 500,000 Russian people.
Probably the only American they've ever seen.
Well, I get invited to parties, and people come look at me like they're going to the zoo to look at a monkey, like, look at the American. And it was a cathartic experience in a way, because I gave up my whole life. I was the #2 sales guy at Harrison International that year in 95, 96. I sold $6.5 million worth of stuff to the Danes, the Turks, the Greeks, and I walked away. It looked as though I would have a promising career with Harris. I was diligent. I didn't drink. I didn't chase women. This was an aberration that I'd fallen for this Russian girl on a business trip, and I decided to change my life, which gets to some personal issues, and it gets into the whole paradigm of this thing that I've learned since this mystery's come upon me of gang stalking and targeted individuals. Let me put that to the side for now, though. In any case, I moved to Siberia. I opened the cell phone company, and in 4 months, we've got more customers than the other 2 Soviet-run cell phone companies combined. Why?
Wow. Why is that?
We had a nice shop, and I trained my guys, and I would use video and say, this is how you should present yourself to the customer. Just doing training as I was taught by the military.
So better sales techniques, perhaps.
Absolutely, stuff that works. How do you present yourself? How do you introduce yourself professionally?
And you're there in a market that's not really used to this type of American, European-style marketing and sales. I guess if you were working in a former communist environment, you didn't have to focus on sales in the way that an American company would. So that makes sense.
Absolutely. I was like a rock star. I felt like I was the most popular guy in this little city of 500,000 people. We were using what's called Beeline, which in Russia is the #2 national cell phone company now. At the time, it wasn't. It just started a few years earlier. But you say, Beeline commercial director, that was a big deal. And so, doing that was very empowering. It was fantastic. I got a chance to learn Russian. I got a chance to be with Svetlana. She moved out to Siberia to be with me. And so I was a happy bunny. And one day I get a call from a headhunter out of London, describing a job in St. Petersburg for someone that sounded a lot like me. I forget her name, British woman, it'll come to me maybe. But I said, hey, that sounds a lot like me. Why don't you put me to interview for that job? And the company was a fixed line phone company. And let me take a step back and just go into Russian telecommunications for a sec. In Russia, you had the local phone companies, and when they privatized things and began to give these licenses for cell phone companies, the local former Soviet company would get one, but entrepreneurs would get them as well. We were an entrepreneur, and because of that, the local phone company hated us, and it was very difficult for us to interconnect with that local phone company. That was very, very difficult. But this company in St. Petersburg was a daughter company of the Soviet company, but with Canadian and then American investment. The company that I ended up working for by getting this job offer is a company called Metro Media International Telecommunications, and they owned 71% of this Russian phone company called Peterstar. It's now part of Megaphone because it was sold off. But at the time, it was the largest all-digital phone network in a city of 5 million people. Think about it. St. Petersburg is Europe's 4th biggest city. I had been living in Siberia for 2 years, and so, wow, I get a job offer, and I think they were offering like $120,000 a year, as opposed to the 75 that I was on. Free apartment, free car and driver, so similar that way. Sales and marketing director position, same job I've been doing in Siberia.
This Metro Media company, it appears to be in New York. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but this is on 505 Park Avenue.
That's exactly right. And it had been set up by, at one time, the world's richest guy, John Kluge. And he had this idea, or his people had this idea, to kind of look at the former Soviet Union and throw seeds out and to see what would happen in telecoms, in cable TV, in cellular, in fixed telephony. And some things took root and some things didn't. So, for example, the largest cell phone company in Georgia was set up by Metromedia, and it succeeded wildly. They also had huge failures doing a telephony company in Baku, which just fell over. They had a cable TV company in Moscow called Cosmos TV, which went from the Ostankino TV tower just using the wrong technology, but who knew? And then they sold that off to Sistema, which is the big Russian holding company that owns Mobile Telesystems, which is Russia's largest mobile phone company today.
Huh.
So I know a lot about Russian telecoms from the 90s, yay me.
And you're right there in the midst. I mean, it's essentially a new country being born, but yet there's a ton of people there, there's a ton of resources, there's a lot of money kind of up for grabs.
Absolutely. It was a hugely exciting time, and it was a huge buzz because I'm getting to meet the guys that set up the Gillette factory here, the Wrigley's factory. It was, it was really, it was different than just being a middle-class guy paying your mortgage, going to the office every day. I got to see and to take part in a small way in the, let's call it the retooling of Russia, if you will, going from the Soviet to whatever it is they have today.
Yes, really the rebirth of a nation. Interesting.
Absolutely, and I get to be with the girl I want to be with, and they're paying me more money. So
right.
I was very happy.
Right.
Metromedia ended up selling all of their companies to Russian local companies, and on my 5th year anniversary with the company, they let me go.
Oh.
So I'd come to Russia on a 2-year contract initially, and the whole idea was just to get this girl and get my life going and get into telecoms and move back to the States and be normal. But things happen. 2 years turns into 7, and I'm married to Svetlana. We have a small son. I'm beginning the process of growing up, and so when Metromedia sold off all their companies, my old boss at Harris gave me a call and hired me back to be their director of Latin American sales. Because as I'd mentioned earlier, when I first got into sales, my first 2 territories were the Middle East and Latin America. So I had some experience going to Venezuela, to Brazil, Chile, selling the spook receivers earlier. And so Dana Maynard, very, very smart guy, he's done very well for himself. He hired me back. And when I went back, this is about 2003, I had the interview process, but I had changed. I had been the chairman of the American Chamber of Commerce in St. Petersburg in my spare time. I had been on the board of directors of this mid-sized Russian phone company. I was very full of myself,
right?
And I had begun to cheat on Svetlana with a slew of Russian women, but always in bordellos. So I was becoming a less than noble character in many ways, morally, let's say, which is key to the whole story as we go further. So we go back to America, and I start traveling to Latin America, and I end up closing the biggest deal that Harris ever had in South American sales in their history from that division, RF Communications in Rochester, New York, for $14.5 million, an integrated communication system for the Chilean army. It was a project called the Acero, which is Spanish for steel, and they were just re-equipping. We were competing with an Israeli company, Tataran, and it was the most miserable 18 months of my life getting that contract done. When I got the contract signed, I came back to the office, and Dana was about to fire me for my behavior on the road, and people didn't like me very much because I was too egotistical, and I quit. Because I just, I'm not happy. You guys aren't happy. I've done my job. You got the $14.5 million. They gave me half of my commission. I said, good, I'm out of here. I'd banked so much money in the bank, I knew I didn't have to work for a long time. And, screw this. You guys are all sitting there in your little offices. I'm a rock star. I was a little bit egotistical. But I hope you see my point. I wanted to have my life and some of the fun that I'd had in Russia. I liked the extra attention. I liked I really had enjoyed the experience, So I set up a sales training company in Moscow to go to corporate entities in Russia and selling them sales training because I knew the quality of sales training in Russia was pretty horrible. And I was pitching myself, I'm the trainer. The only one you'll get is me. I'm not going to send anyone else. It'll be me who has over my career sold $30 million. I set up a mobile phone company. I've done this and that. And it worked. In the first 6 months, I cleared $100,000. So, hey, yay me, I'm a smart guy. I'm so right. This is fantastic. And that brought me back to Russia and got me in touch with a friend, a Scotsman named Adrian Terrace. Adrian Terrace. That's an important name for the story as we go further.
Now, have you sent me an image of him? I'm going through some of the images you sent, trying to find some of these people, but there's so many.
Yeah, there's a lot.
Okay, I'll try to find Adrian here. Please, keep going.
He's 57 years old, and when Metromedia had owned 71% of the shares of Peterstar, the phone company in St. Petersburg, they owned 100% of the shares of the St. Petersburg Yellow Pages. And so while I was commercial director of this phone company, Adrian was general director. That's Kyle Patching. He's a Canadian guy. He's also
sorry. So we've got this guy here.
Him.
This is Adrian.
There is Adrian. Adrian Terrace. He's a Scotsman, you know.
Okay.
I love this guy. Until you really get to know him. My best guess is he's MI6. He's been here for a long time. He's part of the story. So I opened up my sales training company. It's going well. Adrian calls me. He tells me, Rick, I hear you're back in Russia. Why don't you come see me? So sure, I'll sell you a training class, because I was getting $2,000 to $3,000 a day, which is good money. And he says, what I didn't expect, I want to hire you and have you be my COO, my second in command for the Yellow Pages. And I thought, you know, Adrian, I just had a corporate job and I didn't really like it, and I'm very happy doing my sales trainings, so I really don't want to do that. He says, well, Rick, why don't you meet my owner? Because Metromedia, as it has sold off the telecoms companies, it has sold off the Yellow Pages as well. And the owner at that time was a guy named Tony Shura. Tony's a multimillionaire, and he's a psychopath. I say that with love and affection. He's got these pale blue eyes, smartest guy in the room, and likely has relationships with security services. He used to be the general manager of SGS, which is a large Swiss company, which has about 4 billion euros a year in revenue. What does SGS do? Let's say you're Iraq, you're exporting oil. Someone's got to guarantee the quality. SGS is that neutral broker that tells you, they'll check you're selling corn. They'll tell you the quality is good. They're like the neutral broker that everyone has confidence in. They've been at it for a long time. So Tony had become the president of the American operations of SGS, and for a time was promoted to president of the entire company. He lasted about a year in that role and got let go. There was some scandal for paying bribes. I remember him telling me stories how he used to, with him and his finance director, give big briefcases of money to Muammar Gaddafi in Libya. And I remember thinking, wow, that's really cool. And maybe it is and maybe it isn't. It's above my pay grade. God bless Tony. So Adrian introduces me to Tony. We sit down, we have lunch. And you can tell he's you just feel it radiate. He's smart. He's wealthy. And he pitches me that they've got a problem. They've opened up operations in Moscow to make a Yellow Pages there, but it's been losing money for 4 years, and they want me to come in, clean things up, and if it goes well, then they'll open up another business in Kiev, and I'll have shares in the company, and we'll either become the Yellow Pages of Russia and the Ukraine, or we'll sell out to someone else who will do that and make a lot of money. And I thought, this guy's brilliant. And yeah, I'm in. I'll do it. So I'm doing a speaking gig in Serbia, in Belgrade, at the second CRM conference there, doing my sales training stuff, trying to position myself as a smart guru-like guy. And I get a call from Tony. He tells me he's just fired Adrian, and would I come on as the CEO of Yellow Pages St. Petersburg? And I think about it for about 2 seconds, and I agree. So I become at first the COO for about 6 months, and then he promotes me with the title of CEO, and I'm the CEO of the Yellow Pages in St. Petersburg. And it's all laid out, the place has been losing money for 4 years because Adrian hadn't raised prices, and he'd raised his costs, and had just been losing money. So I went in with Tony, and Tony had a finance guy. But Tony's a dual national, Swiss and New Zealand. And he sent a guy who was also a Kiwi from New Zealand, David Fleming. He's now CEO of a New Zealand company called careoncall.co.nz, which is if you need nursing for your grandmother, he'll provide that. So he'll send nurses out by the hour. He's a very bright guy. Mm-hmm. But David didn't speak any Russian. I spoke Russian at that point. And so basically Tony didn't want to be in Russia because he's a rich guy running around the world. And he left David and myself to run the Yellow Pages, me nominally as CEO, and David would look at the numbers every month, and he'd give guidance, and he'd talk to Tony, and they had worked together at SGS. In any case,
Rick, how do I spell Tony Chura?
It's Anthony Michael Chura, but Tonyczura, Tony Chura.
Right.
He grew up not well-to-do. He had a Polish father and an English mother. She was a maid. He was a war veteran. But he's the smartest guy in the room, and he did a whole corporate career at SGS, went all the way up and became general manager. I mean, he's a very talented individual. He's very smart.
It's hard to find him here.
I
think this is him.
That's Tony, right. You can see the psychopathic look in his face. Yeah, God bless him.
All right. There we go.
I used to love this guy. He made me wealthy. We sold the Yellow Pages in 2007, 2008. We sold to some Swedish investors who were running a Yellow Pages in Moscow. The company was called Contact East. That was the Russian holding company, but it was owned by the rich Swedish London family. They've set up basically the Russian version of eBay called the Vito that was sold for about $1 billion a couple of years ago. So these guys know what they're doing. And they had come to Tony, a guy named Philip Engelbert. He'd gone to school in Massachusetts, but a Swede. And he said, Tony, I'll give you $10 million for your St. Pete Yellow Pages, and then he'd merge it with his Moscow Yellow Pages. And Tony said, it's 20 this year, and it'll be 30 million next year. So think about that. So they ended up doing
Was that a fair valuation?
We got 10 times EBITDA. I'm not a finance professional. Again, I know enough to be dangerous, but they had KPMG come in, look at the books, and we were audited professionally, and we agreed on a valuation of 10 times EBITDA. Our EBITDA had gone from negative when I came in because we were losing money to about $2 million a year. Yes, there's Philip and there's Jonas. These guys are each worth $200 million today because they had shares in Avito. They sold off, and they're bright boys. Very, very bright boys. So out of that, I ended up with about $1 million of money and some shares, which I sold later. And I'm feeling very good. This capitalism thing works. I'm a bright guy for having left Harris. Yellow Pages went really, really well. Thank you, Tony. I will love you forever. Thank you, David. Now let's get to the spy part of the story.
Right.
It gets creepy and bad. In 2008, I'm CEO of the new Yellow Pages of Russia. Basically, they found that their general manager of the Moscow operation was a thief stealing money from the company. So when they bought our St. Petersburg Yellow Pages to merge with Moscow Yellow Pages, they had a choice to make. Mm-hmm. Who would be CEO? The local Russian guy they had in Moscow or myself, who'd been running and had fixed the St. Pete Yellow Pages. So they picked me. I say thank you. They give me a raise. And I have to go through and do a merger, which is, I don't recommend it because you're letting people go and it's unpleasant. I never want to have to do that again. But in that time, it was something I wanted to do. I get to start up a company. I get to merge companies. I'm getting all this corporate experience that makes me feel really special and good. And I'm getting paid well. I'm getting compensated as I do it. And so I felt, this isn't bad. I don't know how old, my late 30s, early 40s. And, I get to tell my Mom, guess what? I don't have to work anymore. I got $1 million in the bank. Aren't you proud of your little boy, Rick, who got thrown out of Catholic school when he was a sophomore? Isn't this fantastic? Huh. So there's complexity here, and it goes to the whole spy part of the story. So I'm in Moscow as CEO of this new merged entity, and who comes to the office in 2008 but a 24-year-old, large-breasted, red-headed girl named Anna Chapman. Anna Chapman, 2 years later, would be arrested by the FBI as a spy. And she was traded with that fellow who got the dose of Novichok. She was traded for him and now she can't come back to the States. But she
Skirpal.
has a right, exactly. Poor guy. But she's got a TV show in Russia. She's very popular here. She's a bit of a folk hero. She's got huge tits. And she came on to me in 2008, but by then I had been so jaded by my time in Russia. By then I was going to bordellos in my spare time. It was very inexpensive. They're well looked after. You know, that was my vice of choice. I didn't drink, I didn't do drugs, but I enjoyed women. And I let my relationship with my wife, she had a child, and kind of got involved in that, which is what she wanted to do, and I just wanted to have lots of sex with lots of women. That's what I wanted to do. And so we both did what we wanted to do and ended up kind of hating each other, which kind of gets more involved as the story goes forward. But Anna Chapman comes on to me, and this is before everyone knows she's a spy. I'm not at all interested, and I kind of, I'm pleasant and professional, but I don't demonstrate any interest, and I didn't think much about it until, years later, she gets arrested by the FBI, and I'm thinking, wow, isn't that really cool? I'm right on the sharp edge of the stick. I'm meeting Russian spies.
And we should add, Rick, this is Robert Mueller, who's just completed his Russiagate investigation report, is the director of the FBI at this time.
That's right. That's exactly right. I think FBI has got some good people, but because of my story and my experience, I think our FBI and all these security services are a mixed bag. I think if you look at Oleg Damagard and some of the work he's done, my story is relevant to what the conclusions that he's made. Let me segue a little bit further. So when we sold the Yellow Pages, I've banked $1 million. I last about 6 months in that job, and then Philip and I decide, we're not going to make the sales plan for the year because the business is going sideways. I don't believe in it. And my predecessor, this Moscow general director, he took away one of the sales teams. There's a big black PR page on LiveJournal about me. When he got fired, he attacked the company in such a way as to make it really difficult for us to go sell stuff. And to be honest, Yellow Pages never really took hold in Moscow. If you look at the Yellow Pages history in the United States, when you paid your phone bill, they would print up the book from some of that money. The Yellow Pages in Russia came a very different way. Entrepreneurs came in, built up a database, and went knocking door to door trying to sell the thing. So, in a city of 10 million people, the largest amount of Yellow Pages we ever printed was 220,000. So it wasn't like the Yellow Pages at home that you and I know, Jason. It was an entrepreneurial thing, but it never really took because who uses the Yellow Pages today?
Right.
The best deal I did, the largest contract in the history of the Yellow Pages, St. Petersburg, I sold our database to Google. 50,000 euros a year, and they would use that for their service. And so today, if you were searching for a business, you're going to use in Russia Google or Yandex, the Russian search engine. You're not going to look for Yellow Pages. So we were very fortunate to sell in 2007, 2008 when we did, and to get out because last year they still printed a copy of it here, but it's dead. Yellow Pages in Russia, around the world, is dead. You've got Google. Why would you ever use the Yellow Pages?
Yeah.
So I thought that I had been very fortunate and blessed to have that opportunity to get in, and to sell the thing to someone who valued it and had this belief that it was going to work really well. And to be fair with the Swedes who bought our company, they set up Avito, which is, again, the Russian eBay. So these guys are smart. They do know what they're doing. That's the Rick Macy, the actor. That's a different dude.
How do we find you here on Yandex?
If you type it in Russian, I'll pop up faster. But if you do Rick Macy and then just add the word Russia, maybe that would help.
So it's interesting that Yandex really seems to be modeled after Google. And here it is available in English. I've never heard of it before right now.
Oh, well, gosh, Yandex is big. It's a very big, it's the Google of Russia. I don't know the revenues now, but they're very large. I've met with their general director, very smart guy. Russians value education. These people are, that's me when I had hair.
Yeah.
Back at Peter's Star. So, yeah, there's me. In any case, so we sell, I sold the database to Google. I ended up staying here for 6 more months. And then I had some time off. I did my training stuff again. And this you might enjoy. My first training customer after leaving the Yellow Pages was a company called 10X, which is short for Techsnyab Export. They're the 100% Russian government-owned company that sells uranium internationally. And so the Clintons had just done that deal where Russia gets 20% of their uranium or that. So I was chosen over the Dale Carnegie Institute to do training in Russia for 2 weeks for these folks for like $45,000. It was a big amount of money per day. Mm-hmm. And I knew to raise the price because they said they were looking at Dale Carnegie. I'm like, you guys looking at Dale Carnegie, you're looking at paying some money. So I jacked my price up quite a bit, and they got a contract. And one thing that was interesting in retrospect, the worst student in that class, and they've got very talented people at 10X. 10X is solid. They know what they're doing technically. A little bit weak on the sales side because, again, like you'd pointed out, it came from the Soviet Union. But well-educated people, but they kind of like to sit in their office and they don't want to go see customers because going to see customers is awkward. You've got to behave differently. And American sales guys know that. Russian ones had still a ways to go. And they've made a lot of progress in these 20 years that I've been over here.
But this is a key cultural difference of a society that grows up with communism where the government provides everything versus the, go-get-'em attitude of American capitalist sales guys.
Absolutely. Instead, the idea was, let me make my relationships here in the company real strong. I'll have tea with the boss, kiss his butt, and that'll be good for me. And it worked, right. And it was a Soviet system. God bless. Right. But the guy from this 10X, Vadim Mikarin, was sent over to the States to set up a daughter company, and he ended up bribing some people and going to jail. The FBI bagged his ass.
Mikarin.
And it was funny.
We've heard that name before.
And he's a short Russian guy, well-educated, but when I found out he had been arrested for bribery, it made all the sense in the world. This guy, he'd walk into the sales training class and kind of like look down on, because he didn't need this. He knew it was what? He's going to go bribe people in the States and make a lot of money. That looks like him. Vadim. Worse. And when I was doing that's Vadim, yeah. That's Vadim. That's Vadim. And I no disrespect, he's an educated guy, but ethically, where I was going to bordellos, he's bribing officials at different uranium companies. So we all have our crosses to bear, don't we? Mm-hmm. Anyway, it was a lot of fun doing the sales training for these folks. I would do video of them using the skills and give feedback, and I was good at it. I liked it. I would get rated in 6 dimensions. I'd average a 9.5 on a scale of 1 to 10. I was into it. I was solving my own problems from high school. I hated the teachers that hadn't done anything, and so I would come in with my sales stories of having sold stuff in Turkey and Norway and places like that, and and it worked for a time. So Tony Churik was back into the story, and he's setting up a trucking company in Russia called Pan Motors. The idea is Tony, he made money with Yellow Pages. He wants to make more money in Russia. He's bought himself an apartment in St. Petersburg. He likes the bars. He likes the wildlife with the women, supposedly. And he asks me to be CEO of this trucking company. And the company would be importing American used trucks, selling them into Russia, and then selling parts and service. So not being a trucking company, delivering things, but selling trucks, used American trucks, and servicing them and selling parts.
What was the name of that company again?
Pan Motors, P-A-N Motors. It's interesting to note that that's the same company name, Pan Motors, as was in 1929 or 1930, the largest fraud to that time on the American Stock Exchange.
Wow.
And it's incredible to my mind that a bright guy like Tony would use that same name, and this touches on all the spy stuff and some nasty things that that became part of my life, and I'm trying to share with you now.
Yeah.
In any case, the worldwide economic crisis hits, and Russia increases their tariff on importing used American trucks, so suddenly the business is just not viable, so we've got to shut it down. Mm-hmm. Oh, I had 10% in the company, and suddenly my shares are, I spent a year of my life trying to learn about trucks and setting up an office and a service center, and suddenly it's all gone sideways. I mean, the world collapsed. You remember those days of the financial crisis.
Yeah.
It was bad.
So this was right in 2008 when this company had been set up.
2008, 2009. I think I was there 2009. And we kept it open as long as we had enough inventory. We sold off. The idea was we'd sell off the trucks, get cash, invest in parts, and try to ride through the storm. It didn't work. We ran out of cash and we shut it down.
Right. So Rick, we're coming up on just 10 minutes more for today's conversation. How can we kind of ease into something that's going to keep people engaged for the next time you and I get to share the rest of this?
Let's jump forward. It's 2011. I'm meeting one of these girls in the bordellos that I liked, and she tells me she's got a boyfriend and a pimp, and he's going to come along, and we're going to all meet up together. He gives me a beer, I drink it, and I lose 35 pounds in a month. That's August 2011. The guy's name is Alexander Tregubov.
And this is his agent, right?
That's the girl I ended up falling for later, but she was the girl in the bordello I was seeing that day, and her boyfriend / pimp, Tregubov, gives me a beer, I drink it, I lose 35 pounds in a month, and I think I'm dying. The next month, September, my mother at 79 dies while I'm holding her hand in a Massachusetts hospital. So I begin to go down this psychological spiral into depression. And I'm thinking, I'm going to die. I'm losing weight. I got myself checked out. I couldn't find, these Russians have poisons that you just don't know. And when I met with Zhenya and this Alexander guy, he tells me with great pride how easy it is to kill somebody and how he is sterile and can't have kids, and he's been to Chechnya. And I'm just thinking, you're a weird Russian dude. Why are you so excited to see me? Why are you telling me all this weird shit? I would only learn that later on as this story develops.
This is Evgeny right here?
No, that is August Meyer, a multimillionaire who owns a shareholding in the Russian version of Amazon called Ulmart. August and I used to be friends, and at the time of my mom's death, we'd go over to his apartment and he'd lay out lines of what appeared to be Bolivian marching powder. We'd store it up and have some, and have an interesting evening together. I thought we were good friends. I was wrong.
Got it. Okay, I got confused. Zhenya is the woman. It's basically like Gina and Eugene. It's sort of the Russian version of that name.
That's right, Yevgenia. So I think after my mom dies and I've lost this weight, I've got this money, I've had success in business, my wife hates me, I hate my wife. What can I do that has any meaning? And I decide I'm going to save this girl. I'm going to change her life and get her out of the bordello, get her to college, and just take care of her. I'll have her on the side. I'll stop going to the bordellos and seeing all these girls. I'll just have her on the side. I'll be an asshole, married to my wife, and I'll have this girl on the side. And she's half my age. So I became an asshole. I would learn later that she, with Alexander, had been cooperating with my wife to set me up so that would happen. And in October of 2013, Alexander issues me a death threat because I've gotten this girl out of the bordello. And so Zhenya tells me that Alexander's going to kidnap you and slit your throat. And my wife tells me the same thing, that he's called to her phone and made that threat, a death threat against me. And my mind is blown. I've just, I've fucked up.
How did you learn that they were working together?
Because after I left in October 2013, two of the other people involved with this told me they had witnessed my wife with this Tregubov guy in my apartment being affectionate towards him. And then in June of 2014, in a phone call, Svetlana herself confessed to me that, yes, she had wanted a kid and Alexander couldn't give her one, which was consistent with him telling me that he was sterile. And so I was this dumb American who wanted to come by. And once she got pregnant by me, had the kid, she liked the lifestyle because I paid for everything.
And Svetlana is your current wife, correct?
That's right. We've reconciled, remarried, but we've got some issues to work through. I love the girl, and I think she loves me. She's 45 now, but I believe her to be an FSB-trained honeypot trap that I fell for.
Kind of like Anna Chapman.
Exactly. The same kind, a lower level, but the same sort of thing. And it goes back to how we met, how she came knocking at my door. I never called for her. She came to me, and I believe it was part of a larger setup to make my life go in such a way where I would be a patsy in a presidential assassination attempt in 2014. If you recall, in fall of 2014, the story of Omar Gonzalez, the veteran who scrambled over the White House fence and got into the White House. How did that happen? How did our security services let a guy get that far? My belief, and this will touch on the story if we speak further on this, my belief, based on my experience, is that we've got people at the FBI and in our security services that actually push people using NLP, using gang stalking.
What is NLP, neuro-linguistic programming?
Linguistic programming, power of suggestion. If I suggest to you that we go to the bordello, maybe you come with me. Maybe I'll use certain terms to program you to think about stuff that you wouldn't think about on your own, and you'll think it's your own idea. This whole idea of a Manchurian candidate mind control from the movies is a bit dramatic and drastic.
But there must be more to it than just suggestion. I mean, programming, is it just suggestion, or is it like we hear certain people who say certain things, particularly on YouTube? I've observed that there are YouTube channels that always open their videos with a certain thing that they say. Is the idea that if you listen to this every day, you become somehow hypnotized by that statement and you're ready to receive information, or what?
Absolutely. If you, for example, if you're in front of your TV and you're watching it, your brain goes in this alpha wave state where you're more suggestible. One example I can give, you brought up this picture a few moments ago, the Canadian guy who I believe was a Canadian spy working for CSIS here in Russia, Kyle Patching. He would end all of his messages to me right there. Kyle would end all his messages to me with the tagline, "Hang in there," which I would later learn was an NLP suicide message. The idea being, okay, they didn't succeed in getting me to be the Patsy for this presidential assassination attempt. And so when I came back to Russia, one thing that I learned, I came back in December 2016, all my expat friends dumped me. They had never been my friends. These guys were taking me to bordellos and casinos and bars to explore my weaknesses. And when I came back and I had met with them, by then I had learned an awful lot about deception because of my time in the States that we've not gone into here. But I began to perceive all these people lying to me, and I began to look up on the internet. Without the internet, I don't think I'd be alive today, honestly. I learned about this paradigm of gang stalking, of the target individual. And my conclusion, 2008, Anna Chapman. In 2014, after I've left Russia under a death threat, I'm in Virginia Beach as the house guest of a guy named Douglas Boyce, who's a senior NCIS agent. Doug and I got to know each other in 1999 in Russia while we were both on the American Chamber of Commerce Executive Committee. He was running the Lomonosov porcelain factory, and I was working at the phone company. And I thought, Doug's a great guy. He's ex-Army. I'm ex-Navy. He offered me a job. He was just a great guy. Well, in 2014, he invites me to stay with his family in their lovely house in Virginia Beach, and I stayed there. And at night, we'd sit down in his basement, and he's playing with all the scuba equipment, and he's telling me that, Rick, by the way, everyone thought that you were a spy in Russia. Isn't it funny? I was the spy. That he'd worked for CIA in Russia in 1999 and 2000.
Did you send me an image of Boyce? I'm looking for that.
Yeah, I sent that to you. That's one of the first ones I sent across. Doug Boyce. If you just do a Google, he'll pop right up.
I got him here.
He's got a long swoop of a nose. So Doug, very bright guy, a trained auditor, much like Adrian Terrace and David Fleming. I've met a lot of these trained auditors. And Doug tells me he was a spy. There's Doug. Doug lives at 313 Sage Road in Virginia Beach. It's in Sandbridge. It's a really nice place. He's a very talented individual. But when he tells me that he was a spy, I think two things immediately. One, I've got no active security clearance. And two, I've got no need to know. So why have you, as a senior NCIS special agent, just told me this stuff? I don't get that. But I held my tongue because I was desperate at that time. I had left Russia under a death threat, and I was just learning. I was in the process of learning that my Svetlana had been in on that death threat to get me to leave Russia. So I'm talking to Doug every night, and I'm thinking he's helping me understand how these spies work and what happened to me in Russia, my poisoning. He ended up through the head of security for MMC, Marsh and McClellan, out of their London office, a guy named Dan Mead, with whom Doug had served in the Army. Dan had connections with the St. Petersburg Police Department, And he confirmed that indeed, yes, Rick, you were poisoned in August of 2011 by Alexander Tragubov. They didn't know what I was poisoned with, but that I had been poisoned. And if
we
I
should
wanted
also just mention that Marsh McClellan had some kind of major role in 9/11. James Corbett did a pretty deep dive into Marsh McClellan, right? That's for another day, I guess.
Well, and just take a step back. And this is for your viewers, if you're real interested in how the CIA works, there's a great book by a guy, Douglas Valentine, called CIA as Organized Crime. And basically, think about it. If you're the CIA, right, Russia opens up, you're going to stack that deck as much as you can. You're going to put people in senior executive positions, and you're going to do it all over the world. And what I've uncovered from this, Anna Chapman, a Russian spy, came on to me. Doug Boyce tells me he was an American spy. Suddenly, I've got a key or a prism to use to look at my whole life. Doug tells me in one of my last nights in Virginia Beach, he tells me, Rick, you've misperceived your whole life. And that, to me, was a huge clue, because while I was in Virginia Beach, I had left, I stayed with him for a month and his family, and I'm trying to reconcile with my wife. I've recognized that she was part of this whole horrible thing, but I was screwing around, and let's, for our son's benefit, let's get back together and be normal again. And as I'm trying to have those conversations with her, she admits to me that she'd been with Tragubov, and she'd only been with me because I had some money and I could make her pregnant. And she had told me that Tragubov and she had been monitoring my emails, my cell phones, my whereabouts since 1997, since I came to Russia. Well, who has that capability in Russia? Private individuals don't. The FSB does. I'm sure they're enjoying this conversation now. And, I've caught undercover policemen outside, tracking me here in Russia. I'm here on a visa. I love Russia. I'm respectful. And they've got their law enforcement just as we have it in the States. When I went to the States, I found out that I was being tracked there as well. As I was having these discussions with Doug every night, and the day after Svetlana admits to me that she was part of this thing, I'm suddenly followed by 10 cars with extremely high beams. And I'm like, that's weird. The next night, 20 cars. And the next night, 40. And this whole time I'm talking to Doug, saying, my God, this must be from Russia. And Svetlana's part of the FSB, and they tried to poison me. And Doug would give me, at night, he'd give me lessons in psyops and targeting. And he used the phrase, what juice is worth the squeeze? He told me, get photographs of these cars that are chasing you, send them to him for his analysis, because if you see the same car in two different places at different times, then you are being followed. Doug would tell me how he could beat polygraphs. Before I saw Doug and stayed with him, when I first came across back to America, I was picked up at the airport by a guy named Adam Stanhope, an American, who was a drug dealer on the Silk Road and tried to get me involved in that. And
this is a very interesting part of the story, because I don't know if you saw the interview that I did with Ross Ulbricht's mom, Lynn.
No, I didn't. How did that go?
Well, I mean, she's obviously very upset. Her son is serving 2 life sentences. And so tell us again, what's the guy's name with the Silk Road connection?
Adam.
He went by Nolans, right? Okay, I've got him here.
Stanhope, Pembroke, Massachusetts.
Now, is he related to Doug Stanhope, the comedian?
Yes, they're like cousins or second cousins.
Oh, wow.
Yes. Yeah. Doug and I had a little chat on Twitter, and that was kind of cool. So
this guy's selling synthetic, some kind of drug on the Silk Road.
Right, synthetic stimulants and synthetic cannabinoids. The fake pot that's making people fall over. He was selling that
Ross's mom, Lynn, has said that Silk Road was infiltrated by federal agents who were selling illegal items on there to set up Ross, and Ross is now in jail. Adam Stanhope, of course, after you reported him for what he was doing, tell us what happened.
So in 2014, I go to Doug Boyce and I say to Doug, this thing happened with Adam. He's selling these things online. What should I do? And Doug tells me, clip out from newspapers and magazines words, glue them together, put them in a blank envelope without a return address, and send it to his local police station. And I thought, that just sounds wrong. Doug, you're a senior NCIS special agent. I thought you'd take me like the DEA, introduce me to somebody, or so I didn't do that. And about a year later, I finally had the balls to go on the DEA website, and via their tip service, I reported Adam, and I fully stated who I was and what had happened. It was just very honest and I just thought, Adam tried to hurt me with this stuff and blow my mind with this stuff. And he's selling it to other people, and they get hurt too. And I know about this. It's kind of like you see the dog poo on the floor. You pick it up, you don't just walk away. And so I reported Adam to the DEA, and in a week, he's reported dead. Now, I didn't tell Adam I'd reported to the DEA, because by then we weren't in touch with each other, because when he picked me up at the airport in October 2013, I stayed with him for like a month as I got my shit together, or tried to. He's feeding me drugs, and I'm kind of happy just to have a friend. He's got a Thai wife, I've got a Russian wife. We've been talking for a little while. He's been a friend of my brother's for years. He lived across the street from us growing up, so I've known him for a long time. And so if he says this is okay, you could try this, sure, I'll try that. So I tried some speed with him. I smoked just regular pot. I didn't touch that synthetic stuff. I enjoy marijuana. I lived in Colorado for a while. It's great. But I got the sense there was something going on with Adam, and we had an argument. He tried to get me to invest in the Silk Road business. I refused. I said, Adam, I kind of want to extricate you from this because it's illegal, and then one day the cops will come on knocking on your door. And what do you do when that happens? And he tells me, Rick, when they do that, I'm going to go run to Thailand. He used to own the website Bangkok.com.
Do you have any indication that this guy is in the intelligence world?
No, but I think he was reporting to some sort of police officer, because I recall when I stayed at their home in Pembroke in that fall of 2013, he brought a guy into the house. I was high on weed, and brought this very old military-looking guy who was just really happy to see me. And I just remember thinking, that's kind of weird.
Sounds like he's an informant.
That's what I think, because Adam
so that's exactly the type of guy that they would hire to sell stuff illegally on Silk Road to entrap Ross Ulbricht.
Yes. And my sense of it was, Adam wanted to involve me in this stuff to get me entrapped.
To entrap you, right.
Exactly. And I thought, you know what, I'm Rick Macy, sales guy, general director, CEO. I'm not drug selling on the internet guy. I don't want to be that guy. He wants to pass the joint, I'll take a hit, but I don't want to get involved in this other stuff, because I just, I smoked pot in high school. I touched it over the years, but nothing further than that. What was interesting to me was after I got poisoned, after the death of my mother, 3 people came at me almost in parallel with stimulants. Adam with a thing called MDPV, that fellow August Meyer you saw there with cocaine, and another prostitute that I'd met in Russia named Albina Taptiga introduced me to amphetamine. Not the meth stuff that you got going on in the States now, but the simpler form, the stuff that's less damaging. They actually prescribe it if you've got attention deficit disorder in the States. But it's illegal in Russia, but when a naked girl offers it to you, you might just do it, and I did. And so...
Now, do I have an image of August Meyer?
Yeah, you brought it up a few moments ago.
Okay. Anyway, please continue.
So August is a multimillionaire, and I thought he was a friend. I was incorrect in that. I believe he had the security services. He gave up his American citizenship and now has a Russian citizenship. He did that because he owned a significant shareholding in a Russian supermarket called Lenta. And when he sold it, him and the other shareholders got about $1 billion, and he saved about $300 million in taxes by giving up his U.S. citizenship so many years before he did that deal. Very smart. Yeah, came from a rich family. When Dad gives you $30 million to start off, it makes it a bit easier. This apartment I'm sitting in, I bought from August back in 2006. So I thought we were good friends. I don't believe that was ever the case. I believe August to be one of these gang stalkers with security service connections who, with intent, tried to get me involved in ingesting narcotics.
Now, Rick, I think there's a lot more to your story that we need to cover, but we're getting a little bit long here, and I think this is a lot for people to digest. Are we at a point where we can kind of break here and come back perhaps with another conversation, or do you want to end cap this?
If I could stop.
Sure, yeah.
So I had this life as a sales guy, as an expat, and Anna Chapman comes into my life 2008. Doug says he's CIA. I get a death threat. I get chased by all these cars, which I believe were FBI. Doug tells me to stay in Virginia because he's got something for me to do there, which she says in a very nefarious tone. I decide I had owned a house in Western New York at the time, so I pack my bags up and go to my house in Western New York to find it damaged by the people I'm renting out to, and I'm followed by 40 cars with very, very high beams, I believe to have been the FBI.
In the U.S. now. You haven't had this experience since Russia.
How is this related to Russia? How is this? And Doug kept poising the question, what juice is worth the squeeze? And then Omar Gonzalez gets into the White House. And the crux of my story is I believe I've been a targeted individual from birth, and that I haven't touched upon that. It goes back to my dad in the Middle East right after the Second World War. But that I've been taken along this path to be made wealthy, to be given drugs, to become a sex-crazed, drug-addled maniac who you could then have a narrative to the public saying what a bad guy I am. Let me finish with this little bit. On May 29th of 2009, there was a fire on the roof of the building that I'm in. No idea what happened. I came home, there's a fire. It's bad. The fire department puts it out. I have to fix the place up again. In the summer of 2014, an American whom I met in Russia named Jason Smolek tells me, unasked, the significance of that date. May 29th was JFK's birthday. My belief is that had the FBI, these black ops boys, been successful making me a patsy instead of Omar Gonzalez, yes, that's the building, if they had been able to make me the patsy, I'd be dead, Obama'd be dead, and there'd be this stinking path. They could come back into Russia and say, oh, he must have set that fire. It was on JFK's birthday. He was into drugs, into prostitutes. This guy's, it's that whole lone nutbag.
His mother died. He went into a decline.
Exactly, because I've been in a failed business, and my mother had died, and so I'd lost the plot. And the whole idea was to paint a picture of me, this narrative that could be put to, it's just like JFK and Oswald.
Right.
And let me finish with this final thing. In that summer of 2014, as these cars are chasing me, as Doug is saying, what juice is worth the squeeze, I called back to Russia to a friend of Alexander Tragubov named Yegish Parchatrian, who had been what I thought he was a human trafficker who brought Zhenya into Russia to work in the bordello from Uzbekistan. And I'd called to Alexander's wife. Yegish answers the phone. He tells me, Rick, we're going to make you into this generation's Lee Harvey Oswald. We're going to get you and Obama too. And hangs up the phone. I'm freaked out. I'm getting chased by these cars. My wife has told me, what she told me. I've been poisoned. This guy's trying to get me in drugs. And how is all of this related? And I found some Facebook friendships for people that shouldn't know each other whatsoever. So my strong belief is that the Ole Damagard paradigm is quite right. I think we've got people in the FBI and related services who give gentle nudges to people like Timothy McVeigh, and maybe they go the wrong way and do stupid stuff. I think this Omar Gonzalez guy, maybe they've got some high-tech stuff. Maybe he did hear voices. Maybe that skull, I've never had it happen to me, but maybe these people get pushed into these places like Sirhan Sirhan. Lisa Pease just came out with a real good book refuting that Sirhan Sirhan killed RFK. And so you look at this narrative that we've sold the public, the Warren report with JFK, 9/11. I believe all that is crap by our security services to make more money. Why didn't Joe Biden run for president? My answer, he didn't think he'd have to. He thought Obama'd be dead. Who drafted all the 9/11 all the things that took people's rights? Biden, and he tried to get it passed years earlier. And so little Rick Macy just wants to be a sales guy and have my life and raise my son. Suddenly I find that I'm involved as a target, and my belief, based upon what Doug had told me, that I'd misperceived much in my life, that these things had been set up so that I would become wealthy and I would think that I was a great salesman. And a bunch of these guys that I had met in Russia, expats, were in the employ of CIA, of MI6, of CSIS. And just as Ole Demagard goes into the whole Gladio thing, you notice it's the NATO countries together that are having these problems, like the New Zealand shooting thing. They have that shooting thing. Was it real? Was it not? Was it somehow manipulated? I don't know, but they got the New Zealanders to give up their guns
in like a day.
Yeah. And I think it's a false narrative. I think Ole Damagard is quite correct because it's consistent with my experience. I mean, these guys broke into my homes in New York, and then I took my son to Colorado to get away from all this stuff. And they set drugs into my apartment, into my house. I was gang stalked and chased by the FBI. It's a much darker world than we're led to believe. Why do they put on TV shows of the NCIS every night of the week? It's this whole thing, so you'll have this cognitive dissonance. You're thinking the CIA is great guys because the movies tell you they are. These guys want bigger houses on the beach. There's a lot of corruption. God bless the founding fathers. They put in checks and balances because the human animal is avaricious by nature. And as I've seen it myself, hey, I was going to bordels. I slept with 400 women and more than a few dudes along my path. I became debaucherous. I've stepped back from that. And I've recognized in myself my own weaknesses. Okay, I really like sex. Sex is great. And then you put drugs on top of that. Yay.
Okay, so let me pause you there, Rick, because it's a lot of stuff you've dropped on us today. I think we're going to want to come back and talk to you some more in the future. I want to reiterate, because there's a lot of people putting statements into the comments that are matters of opinion. As you've been talking, I've been going through and bringing up some of the companies that you've spoken about. Bloomberg has you recorded as the CEO of the company that we were talking about there. And again, there's a lot of people in the comments who maybe don't fully get how Crowdsource the Truth works. I don't know you, I haven't met you. This is an intriguing story, but just as people deceived you, don't take offense to this. The possibility exists you could be deceiving us. So I'm not presenting this information as information that I endorse, information that I have approved, but it is intriguing. And if true, it could answer some questions that are opened by other things. It certainly involves a lot of people we've heard about before, a lot of situations and modus operandi that we've heard of before. So I want to thank you for joining me today, Rick, and we're going to stay in communication. I hope you'll monitor the comments on YouTube and Facebook and Periscope and VK.com. We're on the Russia. I think it's still on there. I need to check. Sometimes it disconnects from VK and I'm not looking at it that often. But there's going to be a lot of feedback, and this is the process that we go through. The hope is the crowdsource investigation process will help you learn things about this story, and we'll have you back soon to continue the conversation. Is there anything else you want to say in the last moments here?
Finally, the reason I've come forward to you, Jason, is I want to get this, it's, off of me, and whatever cost happens to me, maybe I get hit by a car tomorrow, I don't know, but I feel with what I experienced, I'm hoping that through your channel, I've contacted some media outlets before, and I've been, it's just too much for, you're the first that's come back and said, let's have a discussion.
I'll tell you what, I was on the edge. I was like, this is all over the place. There's so much stuff here. But I wanted to start laying it out so that we can use this crowdsource investigative process and see where it leads us all.
Let's do that. Yeah. I appreciate your time and your attention, and if at all confusing, I apologize, not my intent.
No, it's just a very deep story is what it is.
Well, if you think about it, though, if you're CIA and you're going to go set up Patsies to assassinate people, you're not going to make it easy to be discovered. That I am here, I should be dead. I shouldn't, that I've made it this far. That when I came back to Russia, one of these guys, Jeff Latino, who I believe is a CIA guy, he runs an ad trading company like Google, but video ads, called Aardvark in Russia. He's also ex-Navy. And he told me, Rick, I would never in 1,000 years have predicted the outcome that you'd survive and get back to Russia and get back with your wife. Because he's one of the bad guys that had been pushing me into debauchery and helping set me up so I would do the stupid things, and I would become the Omar Gonzalez or the Lee Harvey Oswald of our generation, and our friends at the CIA would mind fuck another generation. And look, I served in the military. I took an oath to defend against enemies, foreign and domestic, and this is what happened to me, and I'd like people to know about it. I understand it's all just my testimony. I can't prove a whole bunch of things. You can prove that the fire happened on May 29th. I have copies of texts from Doug Boyce, this NCIS agent, that will help demonstrate what I'm saying is accurate. It's been a long, hard road, Jason. I appreciate your time. I know you're pressed for time, and here in Russia it's past midnight. So thank you, and thank the viewing audience. And if you could send me a link so I could check on the comments, that'd be great as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. Rick, thank you for spending the time, and thanks everybody for watching. I'll be back in just an hour and a half with Larry Klayman. We'll be exploring the implications of Robert Mueller's now complete Russiagate investigation. I want to thank Rick Macy, and we will speak to you soon, Rick. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Jason. Enjoy your day.
Take care.